Welcome back. This is part 2 of installing Gentoo Linux. It's very hard to make this in one video. I don't want to have an hour-and-a-half video, so I'll split it into a part 1, part 2. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go ahead and check that out. If you're only interested in this part, then continue watching, I guess. I know the videos are a little long, but I'm also explaining everything along the way, which stretches it out a little bit. So anyways, we're going to kick off with continuing where we left off, which is configuring the Linux kernel. So there's a few ways that you can configure the kernel, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure type thing here. So you can see in the table of contents here, you've got manual configuration using GenKernel and distribution kernels. So this is up to you. You can have a read. I'm going to use GenKernel. So we're just going to carry on here, installing the sources, Gentoo sources. So again, we're using the ask option here so that it shows you what it's going to do before you install it. So it's just going to install and compile Gentoo sources. So it's going to download and compile, so I'll let it go and do that. Okay, so that took about 1 minute, so that wasn't too bad. So you can check here by listing where it installed it. Here, you can see Linux 5.4.97 are the kernel sources it installed. And then the next step is to compile. So here's the manual configuration, and I'm going to do this part as well. I'm going to go sys apps PCI utils, and I'm going to remove ask just so you could see how if you don't put ask, it just goes ahead and does it. So this is going to install LSPCI. So that took no time at all. So now we're going to go down, and this is manually configuring the kernel. If you want to do this, you can go on the Gentoo kernel configuration guide, and it'll talk about a lot more details about the different options for configuring the kernel yourself. This has, I think, 3, 4, or 5,000 different settings. So if you really want to get into customizing it, you can. I'm not going to do that. This option up here, make menu config, it'll bring up a graphical menu where you can browse through and select the different options that you want installed into the kernel or installed as a module. We are not going to do this because that's pretty hardcore. And a lot of people do this. And then once you've done it once, you can save your configuration, put it on a USB stick, and then when you reinstall, you can just use that same configuration. So we'll just keep going down here, down. Alternative, using GenKernel. So this is what we're going to do. And it says right here, if a manual configuration looks too daunting, using GenKernel is recommended. It will configure and build the kernel automatically. It'll basically configure the kernel the way it is on the ISO file. So it's going to detect all your hardware on boot. So if your system is working off the ISO file and you had no major issues, it's going to work the same using GenKernel. So we'll do emerge, ask, sys, kernel, GenKernel. So there it is. It's going to install GenKernel as well as the Linux firmware package. By the way, you might notice I haven't been typing yes. I just hit enter. If you hit enter, it means yes. If you don't want to continue, you can actually type no or Control C. So we'll let this go. So again, that took maybe 1 minute. Not too bad. The in the last video, the one that took 2.5 hours when we changed the use flags was after we changed profiles. So a lot of things got rebuilt, reconfigured, pulled in. So that was a huge change to the base system. From here on out, we're just going to be building new things, which doesn't take that long. Some things do. So next here, we're going to edit the fs tab file. So nano etc fs tab. And this is your mount points for the system. And we're basically going to go down here and we're going to add SDA2 tab, boot, tab. It says ext2, but remember when we created the file systems, we made it a VFAT. So be aware of what you did before. And if you don't remember what you did, you can exit this, go back into parted/dev/SDA or whatever your device is, and just type print, and you'll see what the file systems are. So I'll carry on, defaults, 0, 2. We're going to add more to this later on, but this is just to get the kernel up and running. So Control O, enter, Control X. Next step here is to actually get the kernel compiled. There's a bit of a warning here. Kernel compiles the kernel that supports almost all hardware. This compilation will take quite a while to finish. So this is part of the optimization I was talking about. If you take the time to configure the kernel manually, which we're not doing, it'll be quicker to compile because you're only compiling what you need and not everything. Also, ensure to read the other notes if you're using LVM and whatnot. We are not, so let's just go kernel all, and we'll let this go. Okay, so that's done, and that took about 14 minutes, which isn't too bad. You'll see there's some warnings and whatnot. You must tell your bootloader, etc. We will do that, so don't be concerned about that. As long as you didn't get any errors, we're good to carry on. So in the next part here, we're just going to confirm that the files that we need have been created. So this and boot init ram fs star, and you should see 2 files, and we do. These are the 2 we're going to need later, so we're good to carry on. Now the next section is alternative using distribution kernels, which we're going to skip because we used kernel. So keep scrolling down, and we're at kernel modules. So now this part here, you're going to want to read. It says exotic hardware requires help to load their drivers. If everything is working for you, should be fine. You can always revisit this afterwards if you're having issues. But I've installed this on 2 different pieces of hardware, a desktop and a laptop, as well as a couple of virtual machines, and I haven't had to do this, so we're just going to skip this part. There's examples here and links you can follow to sort yourself out if you need to. And then the last section is optional installing firmware, which it did. So if we go emerge ask syskernel Linux firmware, you'll see it's trying to install the same package that we already installed earlier. And you can tell because there's an R here instead of an N. If it was an N, that would mean it's new. So in this case, we could just say no, and we're going to go to the next step, which is configuring the system. So we're getting close to a reboot here now. We have to finish editing the fs tab file. It explains everything that you need to do. So we're going to go ahead and edit fs tab. And you can see previously we added the boot partition. And this section talks about UUIDs. These are IDs. Here, let me just exit this and go block ID. This is listing all the information about your partitions. So you can see we have SDA with UUID 2E, 9E, etc. They all have their own unique identifier. So when we're editing fs tab, you can see there's an example here where they're using the UUID instead of /dev/ whatever. If it's a system with 1 drive, it's not that important. If you have multiple drives, I've seen on occasion where the SDA and SDB, as in your first and second disks, sometimes get swapped around, which means that this will be incorrect when it loads. So if you do have more than 1 drive, you may want to do UUID. That way you don't have to worry about if this is going to happen or not. But in our case, in a virtual machine or a system with only 1 drive, you don't really have to worry about that. So we'll go scroll down. An example, this is what it already looks like, and this is what we would want it to look like. And this is the same way we initially set up the disks in the last video, so you can actually just follow this if you did exactly what the guide said. So I'll go ahead and add all this, and then we'll carry on. If you have a machine that happens to have a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, you may want to do this last part, but in our case, we don't, so this is good enough. So Control-O, Enter, Control-X, and we're done editing fs tab. One thing to note, if you have an SSD drive, you could also enable the discard mount option. So after the no A time, you can add discard. And this just enables a command called trim, which is beneficial for SSDs. I do have an SSD. I'm not that concerned about it now, so let's just not complicate anything. Save and exit, and let's go on to the networking information. This may or may not be important to you. It's just what your computer name is going to be. So the default is just localhost. We can rename this to whatever we want to call our machine. So change the host name and then Control-O, Enter, Control-X to exit, and then scroll down here. Domain name. If you need a domain name, it says if your ISP or network administrator says so, or if the network has a DNS server but not a DHCP server. If you just have home internet, you don't have to worry about this, especially if you have DHCP. So let's carry on here. NIS domain, if you don't know what it is, you don't need one. It says right there. And then we're going to configure the network. So as it explains, the network was configured on the live ISO, but not in the environment that we're in now in the CH root. And it explains everything. So we're just going to go follow along, and we're going to install no replace net miscellaneous net ifrc. And that's done. And it explains DHCP is used by default. And for DHCP to work, DHCP client needs to be installed. This is described later. If you are not using DHCP, you would edit this file and you would manually enter your IP information. To use DHCP, which we are, it says define config eth0. So eth0 is the network name. We're just going to do an ifconfig because you can see that ours, and yours might be different too, is called enp0s3. So let's go ahead and nano etc conf.d net, and we're going to go config enps03 equals DHCP. Save that and exit. And then let's carry on here. So automatically start networking at boot. This is pretty easy. You're going to create a symlink for net.lo and net.enps03 or whatever your network interface name is. So hit enter, and file exists. Don't worry about that. I had to backtrack here, so I already did a symlink. And then we're going to add the service to start. So rc update add net.enp03 default. So this is OpenRC. This is what we're using instead of systemd. So this is how you set a service to start. There's different run levels. This is default. You've got boot and others. We're going to explore some of that later, but for now, we've set our network interface service to start at boot. So now it tells you here, if after booting you find out the network interface, which is documented as this, was wrong, execute the following steps to rectify. So we basically already did this, but if you find out afterwards that your network isn't working, then you can just follow these steps to fix it. So now we're going to edit the hosts file, nano etc hosts. And there's an example here. So you're going to want it to look sort of like this here. It's already going to have 127.0.0.1, and I just added Gentoo in front of localhost, which was already here. Gentoo is the host name that I set the computer as. So whatever you set your host name at is what you want to put in here. And then just save and exit. And next is getting PCMCIA working. If you have an older laptop that has PCMCIA, you're going to want to do this, but we're going to skip that. And then setting the root password. There's an extra step that I do here as well. If you just do password and let me set this password, it's saying weak password, it's too short because there's a minimum set of requirements, which I'm going to bypass. So we're going to do etc. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to because this is just a VM and I don't care and I like my short password. So you can go edit etc security password quality check.conf, and at the top you'll see minimum 88888. I just changed all these to 11111. Save it, exit, do password again, and then I can do a short password and it lets me. That's something that you can do or not do. That's up to you. Personally, I want my nice short password that I always use. So there we go. Init and boot configuration. This is something that you'll want to maybe look at later on in your Gentoo life. For now, it's very heavily commented, so you can have a look at everything in here, and in the future you can completely customize this if you want, but we're just going to leave it as it is with its default settings. And next we're going to edit key maps. So for my system, it's using US. Yep, that's fine. Windows key. Yep. Extended key maps. I don't have any. If you're not using a US keyboard or you want a different layout, you're going to have to look into configuring this. But in my case, it's good to go. So I'm going to carry on. And then hardware clock. If your hardware clock is not using UTC, it's necessary to set clock equals local. Mine is indeed, as I saw in the first video, it said UTC after the time, so I can skip this part here. Next is installing tools. So this is the last section before we actually get into installing the bootloader and then rebooting into our hopefully working system. So we're not going to use all of these. The system logger is something that's probably handy to have for troubleshooting. So we'll go ahead and do this one. So emerge ask appadmin sysklogd. Install this. Yes, please. And that's actually a pretty quick compile. So, and then we're going to get the service to start. Default added. Good to go. Optional cron. You can install cron if you want. Maybe you want to have some things run automatically every day. I don't use it, but it's something you can look into if you want to have system check every day or something different. File indexing, I'm not going to do. Remote access, I'm not going to do. You can do that if you want. I'm going to skip this. But file system tools is something that we do want. So whatever file systems you plan to access, you're going to want to install these. So for sure, we're going to have emerge e2fs progs. So you'll notice I didn't add the sys-fs. You don't really have to. If there's only one available, it will tell you, but if there's different sections that have the same program, it'll ask you, well, which one do you want? I don't know. And then you'll have to specify, but that's optional. I've just been doing it because I'm following along with the guide here, but this is something you can do to save time. So that only took like 30 seconds. DOS FS tools is the other one we want because VFAT, FAT32, our boot partition is FAT32. Yeah, we're going to want this. If you're using ButterFS or you're experimenting with other things, you're going to want to install those tools as well. And again, that was also super fast. And then finally, installing a DHCP client. If you are manually setting your IP and all that stuff, you don't have to do this, but we're not. So we want to have the system ask for an IP address, DHCP CD. So this is new, so yes. If you want more information on DHCP, there's a whole article on it. And then PPP OE client, we don't need, and installing wireless network tools. If you're using this on a laptop that has Wi-Fi, you definitely want to look into this a little more. If your laptop has an Ethernet port, I highly recommend doing this wired in because if you set up your Wi-Fi and it's not quite working, and then you reboot, you can't connect to the internet anymore because your Wi-Fi is not working. So the Ethernet's a good backup. You can at least do some experimenting and try different things if you have to. The guides are really good for this, but at least you'll have internet access so that you can download anything that's required to get your Wi-Fi up and running. And now we are configuring the bootloader. This is the last part here, guys. There's a lot of different ones to choose from. Grub2, Lilo. I haven't used Lilo since, the 90s. But anyways, default Grub2. So that's what we're going to use. So I'm going to do emerge ask verbose grub2. Another famous afterthought here. A note for UEFI users. Running the above command will output the enabled grub platforms values before emerging. So since I did ask, it's going to ask me to install some things. You can see here what it's talking about is grub platforms equals EFI 64 and PC. So let's go ahead and say no. And we're going to do what it says here. Echo grub platforms equals EFI 64. It also said PC, but I never did it before and it works. Just note the single quotes or apostrophes and double quotes here. Now we're going to put that into etc portage make.conf. You can also just use nano and type that in manually as well, but this is just pushing that line into that file. So now we're going to go ahead and do the same command without verbose. Doesn't really matter if you do verbose or not. I'm just following the guide. And yes, go ahead and install grub and EFI boot manager and whatever else it needs. So that took about a minute to do. And if you keep scrolling down here, again, more afterthoughts. If you installed grub2 without adding that first, then you can add it to the make.conf and then run this. So I don't like how they give you a command and then afterwards they're like, by the way, if you have this, don't do what we just said. So that's why I mentioned earlier, make sure to read a little bit before you do these commands because it mentions things after the command. And I don't like the layout, but it is what it is. So like it says, grub2 is now merged to the system. It's installed in your system, but the grub bootloader is not installed on the partition. So the next step is install. So if you're using a BIOS system, you don't have EFI, it's just grub install to your drive. Don't put a number at the end, just put the SDA, SDB, whatever it is. And if you are using UEFI, which we are, we're going to do grub install target equals x86 64 EFI directory equals boot. So let's go ahead and run that. Installation finished, no errors reported. Perfect. So now we're going to have to update our configuration. There's a couple of things here you may have to read if you're having any issues, but we're good to go on that. So we go to the next part, which is configuring. So we're going to go grub make config -o boot grub .cfg. Make sure here, I know everything is a conf file. If you do this, it's not going to work. It's .cfg. So hit enter. You can see that it found the Linux image. It found the initrd image, which is what we expected, and there were no errors. So grub is now installed. We should now be able to boot into the system independently. There's a tip here. If you are dual booting or multi-booting with Gentoo, you can install OS Prober. That way it will find Windows distributions and whatnot as well and add them to the grub menu. So these alternatives are alternatives to grub. So Lilo, we're not going to use. EFI Boot Manager, no. SysLinux, no. And then now we're ready to reboot the system. And you can see here, it no longer says chroot. It just says live CD because we've now exited the environment and we're now back on the live USB. So do a CD, then you're going to unmount everything. And now don't forget to remove the bootable CD, or we're using a virtual machine, so the ISO file. So instead of reboot, I'm going to shut down so that I can remove. Okay, that didn't work. So I'm just going to catch it while it's rebooting here. Force off and then remove the ISO. So now it should boot directly off of the disk. So fingers crossed. We have grub, enter, and it is loading. Now, if you have any issues at this point and it won't boot, you can go back to what we did way back, boot off of the live ISO again, mount your root file system again, mount all those things, dev, proc, sys again, and then chroot back into the system, and then just go through the grub install instructions again and make sure you didn't make a mistake or typo. Just run everything again, reboot again, and hopefully you'll find your mistake and you'll be good to go. But we're good. So root, password, and we're in, and Gentoo. So let's ping gentoo.org. Temporary failure in name resolution. All right, so I have an error here. So here you can see, so I did ifconfig, but that's only going to show you what is currently up. So I did ifconfig-a, and you can see my network interface name has changed to ENS3. It used to be ENS or ENP-S03, so it's been changed. So let's just go back here. System tools. We can use this. Configuring the network. Okay, we did this, and the confd.net. So let's go in here again because it is now called ENS3, etc conf.d.net. We're going to change this to ENS3. Okay, save, exit. And we're just basically going to go through this again. Go back into init.d, and the symlink that we created was ENPS03 in baby blue there, but that is incorrect. So we're going to remove it. And we're going to create a new symlink with the proper name. net.lo net.ens3. And then RC update. Let's delete the old one because I think it is still there. ENPS03 default. Okay, so that's removed. That was the old one. So now we're going to add net.ens3 default. Okay, so that's added. And I think that should be it. So now we can do net.ens3 start. So I got a DHCP lease, and there we go. So let's try and ping again. And we are getting a ping. Perfect. So now since I've already set this service to start automatically, when I reboot, it should be working again. So let's go back to where we were, which was rebooting the system and then finalizing. So here we're going to do a few things like adding users. So let's go ahead and make sure you're logged in as root, which is the only user. So that's easy. And we're going to go user add -m -g. We want users, wheel, audio, s/bin/bash, and your username. And then we're going to set the password for my user. And done. So now we can go ahead and remove the tarballs. That's that stage 3 file that you can see there in red that we downloaded at the beginning. So just remove /stage3. Just hit tab to autocomplete the file name. So now we have a system up and running, and it gives you a couple of things where to go from here: forums and IRC, mailing list, bugs, and closing thoughts. And then this is the end of setting the base system. So now what we're going to do next is install KDE. So we're going to do Plasma, and it also needs Xorg. So you can go through here, prerequisites, choose the appropriate profile. We did that in the first video when we selected Plasma. So the profile is set, so we don't have to do that. And then it tells you here that there are certain things that you need. You need one of these, and then these 3. So one thing I like to use is called eQuery. So we're going to go ahead and install that. Gen Toolkit. Let that go ahead. Yes. And eQuery is just an easy way to see what's installed on your system. It can do a lot more, but I just use this to quickly check what I have. So that's installed. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have what is required here. So we're not using systemd, but we want to see if we have eLoginD, for example. So I'm going to do eQuery list, and I find this is a better way to find wildcards. I just pipe it into grep, and then I can do eLoginD, and you can see that it is installed, so that's good to go. So go ahead and click on eLoginD, and you can go through and you can see if the service needs to be started or not. So emerge, etc. So add eLoginD to boot. So we want to make sure that we do that. So this is a little bit of jumping around, but it's not that bad. So RC update, add eLoginD to boot. So now it's added to the run level boot. So now let's go back and udev. Let's see if we have udev. Again, I'm just going to grep the output, and we do have udev. So we can go ahead and have a look here. Anything about service? Yes. So we want to add udev to the sysinit run level. So RC update, add udev sysinit. It's already there, skipping, perfect. So next, dbus, polkit, and udisks. So let's see if we have dbus. And we do. Open that. check the services, and we want to add dbus to default. RC update, add dbus default. So now that's added. Next, Pol kit, the policy kit. Pol kit is enabled. Let's see if it has a service that we need. And it doesn't seem to. Just do a quick check to see if it asks us to add it. It doesn't run as a service. It is requested by other processes. The policy kit is what's going to give you different privileges for different things. And we also want udisks. Udisks is not installed, so let's go ahead and install that. It's got quite a few things, but that's fine. We'll just go ahead and do that. And while we're waiting, we can go ahead and have a look to see if it has any services that need to be started. And I don't see any. You can see here udisks uses dbus and polkit, so set them up first, which we did. We're doing it in order here, so that's really nice. So nothing about services, but you might want to look up here. Where did I see it? Right here. Plug dev. Make sure your user is in plug dev. I believe this allows you to access USB devices when you plug them in, external drives. I'm not going to do that part, but you can just run this command here and add your user to plug dev, foo being the username. So other than that, I'm just going to wait until this is done, and then we're going to carry on with installing the X server. Okay, so that took about 8 minutes. So let's have a look here. There's a couple of messages. So it says make sure LVM init script is in the run level. So let's go ahead and do that. You don't really need to if you're not using LVM. I'm just doing it. It says also make sure enable LVM-etad in lvm.conf. I'm not going to do that. I'm just showing you if you are using LVM, you need to do this. And then it says you should reboot the system now to get run mounted with tempfs. So let's just do that and go ahead and reboot. All right, so I've rebooted and logged back in. So let's carry on here. We need to install X server before Plasma. X server is what displays things on your screen. So I've got it opened up here, and let's just go through, starting with the use flags. Portage knows to use the X use flag, which is a default in all desktop profiles. So it should have done it, but it doesn't hurt to just add it, I suppose. So let's do a nano portage make.conf. And let's just add X here, save it, and exit. Next is the Xorg drivers. This is depending on what type of video card that you have. So on hardware, for example, with my system that I have here, I'm using AMD GPU because I'm just using an older AMD graphics card, and that's what I needed to use on hardware. But for this one, we can click on video cards, and then in here, you can see all the different video cards that are available. So you can click on NVIDIA or Radeon or AMD GPU and follow the instructions here. I'm not sure what's involved with NVIDIA because it's proprietary drivers and whatnot, but if you scroll down here, you can see for AMD, for example, the majority, you could just put AMD GPU. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to edit the make.conf again. And then here, I'm just going to add video cards equals QXL because I'm using a virtual machine with QEMU and it's using QXL. So save that, exit, and it tells you here you can check to see if it's already been installed. So when you run your search, it'll say latest version installed, and you can see here it says not installed. So I'm going to go ahead and do ask verbose, and then you can see here everything that it's going to install, which includes Xorg server, and you can see Xorg drivers with QXL, and it's going to install XF86 video QXL. So do I want to merge? Yes, I do. So I'll let that go. All right, so that's done, and it took about 5 minutes. The next section talks about Mesa, so we could do a search again for Mesa. And you can see here that it is installed version 20.2.6, and then Xorg server. And if you do a search for Xorg server, you could see that when we installed the drivers, it did also install Xorg server. But it says, alternatively, you can install the X11 base Xorg X11 meta package, which installs the full release with additional fonts and utilities. You can actually go in here and click on the version, and you can see everything that it installs. I'm going to skip that part though, because it says right here too, they're not necessary for a working desktop. There are X11 overlays, which we're not going to get into. And then we have permissions. So we can check this as a regular user. And it's not showing my username. So I'm going to go back into root, and we're just going to add my user to video, and we'll carry on. Xorg.conf is something that we don't really edit anymore. That's kind of old. And then boot service is going to be taken care of when we install KDE. So now we're done with X server. Now we can get on to Plasma. So you can see here, Plasma Meta is what we're going to install. And these are the use flags for the meta package. And it says, alternatively, you can use Plasma Desktop to provide a very basic desktop, leaving users free to install only the extra packages they require. We're going to go ahead and emerge ask KDE Plasma Meta. And I put a space. Try that again. And this is going to install a lot of stuff here. And you can see here the following use changes are necessary to proceed. Would you like to add these changes to your config files? Yes. So now it's saying configuration files need to be changed, and we do that with dispatch-conf. So you run this, and it is looking to update your configuration files. This could be a whole other video, but what you're going to do here is hit U to use the new configurations, and then we can go ahead and run the command again. You can look into dispatch.conf and changing the configuration files on the wiki, but to get this up and running, we're going to accept what it wants. So now it's going to let us merge these packages, so let's go ahead and do that. 228 packages, so it's going to be a little while, so I'll be back when it's done. Okay, so that took just over an hour. That was Plasma, so it was a lot of stuff. We installed the entire desktop. So we're going to continue on here. And here's the warning earlier. If you only install Plasma Desktop, you're not going to get power management. You're not going to get system settings, etc. But we installed the meta package. So this should have installed SDDM, our display manager. And we can confirm that with equery SDDM. And yes, indeed, it was installed. Now, as it mentions here, you can also use LightDM, etc. Let's just click on this link because we can have a quick look through that. This here is if you want to start the X server, the graphical part, with start X manually. But we don't want to do that, but you can do that with this here. Widgets, KDE Plasma add-ons package, which was already installed by Plasma Meta. System tray for legacy icons, you can use legacy systray. Not concerned about that yet. Pigeon, Kwallet. I think Kwallet was already installed, but we can have a check here. Yeah, it was. Kwallet auto unlocking. Kwallet PAM. So you can see we have both here. We have Kwallet and Kwallet PAM. So that is good. And let's continue down for security. Okay, disabling Kwallet. SSH, we're not using. Non-root user authentication for dialogues. So non-root user authentication is for example, starting up the partition manager. It needs root access, so it'll pop up a little dialog saying, hey, I need your password to continue. It says this is handled through Polkit and operates independently from admin sudo. Now, that I'm not sure we have. If not, I'm going to install it because it is handy. So now that sudo is installed, let's do visudo, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to scroll all the way down here. Keep scrolling until you see where it says root all equals all. And down here, you can uncomment this for wheel. Because our user is part of the wheel group, this will allow your user to use the sudo command. All right, so let's carry on here. Run GUI applications with root privileges, Plasma settings, kdesu, I think KDE is already installed. Let's just check here. And it is, so that's the little dialog that'll pop up asking for root access. So we didn't change anything here, so we can just keep going. Okay, before we get too far here, let's have a quick look in the SDDM page because I opened it earlier and I don't want to get too far and then forget about it. So it is installed. That's done. If there are performance issues, add SDDM user to the video group. So keep that in mind. Configurations. To select the correct key map on the login screen, add the following lines. Okay, let's go ahead and do this just because you might have to do this. And I don't think it's going to hurt anything to do this, so we can just do it anyways. X11 display command equals etc SDDM scripts x setup. Check for spelling. Good. Save, exit. You probably don't have to do this, but you never know. So now we're going to create the file that we had just referenced in the SDDM conf file. And we're just going to do set xkb map us, save, and exit. Okay, what else could we maybe have to do? We have to give permissions for that script to execute. And then we have to make SDDM the default display manager. XDM. So you can see this file exists, but we want to change display manager to SDDM. Save and exit. And then we're going to have XDM start up on its own. So that's done. And then we can start SDDM now, but let's not do that quite yet. Okay, long load time, permission denied errors. Okay, so there's some troubleshooting, user stuff. Everything seems okay so far. So let's go back to KDE and let's just have a look at what else we might have to do here. So release service, service master branch. Okay, these are different metas that you can install. So like KDE Utils, you can click on that, click on the version number, just pick the newest one. You can see this is going to install Dolphin, Arc, FileLight, Kate, KBackup, bunch of applications that will come with it. So I did do this before. I'm going to skip it for now. I don't think there's anything I really need to install. You can just have a look in each one here and see. Okay, system log, no. Okay, so I'll leave it as now. I just want to get to the desktop. The KDE apps meta package provides full release service bundle, but alternatively, one of the several smaller meta package from the list above may be picked instead. So this is probably going to be everything. So you can see in here, it is basically all the other meta packages in this meta package. So it will install all or most of these by just installing this one, so you don't have to do one at a time. So localization, enable localization, frameworks, troubleshooting. Okay, that looks about it. So let's see what happens here. I'm back on the SDDM page, and we're going to see if we can just start it and see what happens. So we're going to go etc init.d xdm start. Hey, look at that. So we have the login page, and we have Plasma on Wayland, which I don't think works. I don't think we installed Wayland, but I'm just going to do Plasma. And let's go ahead and log in. And just make this full screen. So you can see there's a bunch of default shortcuts that are still there for things that weren't installed, like Discover and probably Dolphin and web browser. So it's kind of odd that those are there, but that doesn't really matter. So let's go ahead and change the resolution to something a little more sane. Ah, okay. This is a virtual machine. So K-screen needs to be disabled, background services. This is something you might find handy if you're running KDE in a virtual machine. It won't let you change the resolution. So if you just stop kscreen2 and uncheck this so it doesn't run, it'll let you change the resolution without switching back automatically for some reason. The only downside is every time you log in, it won't remember what you set it at. So we have a system. What do we have for installs? Here, let me change this to alternatives, dashboard. And you can just see more here. All applications. We've got the info center. So KDE 5.20, perfect. And let's go. We have KSysGuard, manage printing, audio, Qt5 Designer, VLC. So that's about it. Pretty bare bones installation, but we've got a desktop. Now, one thing we don't have, which is a little annoying, is a terminal. So yeah, so I can go here and let's do Control Alt F1. And we're in here. And now I can do emerge ask console. And I can also do Dolphin and Arc and Firefox and whatever other packages I want, and it'll just go ahead and install them. I'm just doing this for my sanity, so I have my graphical interface running as well as a terminal to use. All right, so now we should be able to go Control Alt F7 to get back in here. Perfect. And now we should have console. Right on. All right, so now you can emerge all those packages that you want. Firefox takes quite a while. There's also Falcon if you want, but that will need the Qt web engine, which I excluded. That takes forever to compile. You can also actually do Flatpaks. I know it sounds counterintuitive to have Flatpaks within Gentoo, because why would you do that when your whole goal is to optimize and build everything? But if you just want something installed real quick, you can do that. So if you emerge Flatpak and then go to Quick Setup, you can just click the Gentoo icon here and it'll tell you what to do to get things up and running with Flatpak. Just make sure after you do this, restart, and then it'll work fine. So let's just go ahead and do another quick test here and restart. So this is my goal up to this point for these install videos. There is, of course, more to do with packages, installing, uninstalling, updating, and whatnot, which will be a much, much shorter video, I promise you. Actually, I take that back. I can't promise you that, but hopefully it won't be a 45-minute or 1-hour video. So we logged back in, rebooted, everything seems to be working. And like I said, it doesn't remember your resolution. You can change that. There's a way to do that, which I might throw in the next video, but it's only for virtual machines. It'll work fine on hardware. So this is a different virtual machine that I set up before. And as you can see, the resolution is what it's supposed to be right off the bat, including the login screen. And I've got a bunch of applications here. I can show you here. We've got Flatpak. So I installed a Firefox Flatpak. I have OnlyOffice, Spotify, and everything works. But I also have Dolphin, Firefox as a regular application, LibreOffice, which I compiled, and a few other things that GIMP I compiled, Kate, and all these here. There's not a whole lot, but it works really well. I'm really surprised with the performance in a VM. Playing HD video in YouTube in a virtual machine is seamless to running it on my hardware, which is pretty impressive. So now I think at this point you should be good to go with installing additional software. One handy thing you can use if you don't want to search for packages in the terminal is to go to packages.gentoo.org. You just search Gentoo package search. And then in here, you can just do a search for packages and it'll tell you the full name that you can emerge. You can click on it and it shows all the information on it and whatnot. So everything's in here. So this is handy if you don't want to use the terminal for searching, but it's up to you. You can also just go emerge, search, Emacs, and it'll show you. But as you could see, with a package like Emacs, you might get a lot of results that you're scrolling through, and you got to find the one that you wanted, which is here. So yeah, so you can see the name, same as on the website. So now hopefully this got you up and running, at least with the desktop. You can try and experiment with LightDM or GNOME. I've also installed GNOME on another one. I installed XFCE. It all works really great. I had some theming issues with XFCE, which is why I switched to Plasma, but it is what it is. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen that I was complaining about no audio in my install, and that's my stupid fault because I did not have Pulse Audio installed. I only had ELSA, and I was using Flatpaks, like Flatpak Firefox, Flatpak Spotify, which only use Pulse Audio. Everything else was working fine. It just wasn't working in Flatpaks, but I put Pulse Audio in, and now it works. So let me know if this helped you out. I know it's quite involved. I did a lot of talking, and I'm just trying to explain things along the way, which makes the video longer, and there's not much I can do about that when I'm trying to explain what's going on and give tips and advice and whatnot. My next video will be installing and uninstalling software, updating the system, and a bit of troubleshooting, some things that happened while I was installing things and whatnot. So don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Enjoy Gentoo, and until next time, bash on.